hired one guy. I said, who's that? He said, Vince Russo. And see this face, please. Cameraman, pull back, because I actually did this accidentally. I can't do it again. You know, but that was the face. What? I said, what? One of the reasons why I had agreed to come to work for the company was I thought that I was safe because he'd already been there and been fired.
Jim Cornette warned us about Vince Russo, but nobody listened. For years, the traditionalist promoter screamed that Crash TV would destroy wrestling, that breaking kayfabe kills the magic, that treating championships like props murders fan investment. Everyone mistook quick ratings for genius. The corporate executives saw short-term spikes and called it innovation. So, how did one man see the wreck coming years before it happened? And why did the biggest companies in the business walk straight into the fire anyway? The story begins in May 2026, when professional wrestling stands at its highest financial peak in history. Under TKO Group Holdings, the industry enjoys record-breaking live gates, massive media rights deals worth billions of pounds, and events driven by patient storytelling. Titles are sacred again. Wins and losses dictate progression. Athletic credibility is protected at all costs. Modern fans are treated as dedicated theatergoers, willing to invest years in a single narrative payoff. And if you want more deep dives like this, hit the hype feature and give this video some hype while we dig into how the warning got ignored for decades. This boom vindicates a philosophy that nearly died in the creative wars of the late 90s. At the center stood two men with opposite worldviews. Jim Cornette, a traditionalist historian raised in the territories of Mid-South, Memphis, and Ohio Valley, viewed wrestling as a simulated athletic contest depending on the absolute protection of kayfabe. The illusion of reality maintains emotional stakes. The audience must believe the conflict is real within the context of the show. Without that belief, fans stop buying tickets, ordering pay-per-views, and caring who wins. Vince Russo came from a different world. A radio host and magazine writer from New York, he viewed the industry through the lens of episodic soap opera. He championed Crash TV over bell-to-bell ring psychology. He believed wrestling matches were an archaic hindrance to television ratings. He wanted short matches, frequent interruptions, constant swerves, and worked shoots exposing the business to cater to internet-savvy fans. These philosophies collided violently in the World Wrestling Federation creative boardrooms in the late 90s, then exploded across World Championship Wrestling, causing a meltdown costing over £60 million annually. They detonated total non-stop action wrestling, destroying mainstream distribution. The conflict nearly killed the industry. We will trace the chain. The WWF clashes that formed Cornette's warning. The WCW chaos proving it correct. The TNA repetition showing the industry refused to learn. The Spike scandal destroying mainstream distribution, and the long-term audience damage taking decades to repair. This is how ignoring Jim Cornette's warnings shattered international alliances, evaporated millions of fans, and left Vince Russo as a pariah whose booking philosophy is universally recognized as a blueprint for bankruptcy. The ideological battleground was established in the late 1990s within the World Wrestling Federation creative planning sessions. Under intense rating pressure from World Championship Wrestling's Monday Nitro, which was destroying the WWF in the television ratings week after week, WWF chairman Vince McMahon assembled a creative committee that placed Cornette and Russo in direct daily opposition. This creative environment was a powder keg. It pitted Cornette's traditional narrative structures, built on decades of territorial wrestling experience, against Russo's hyper-accelerated, sensationalist concepts borrowed from trash television and tabloid journalism. Every planning session became a war. Every creative decision became a battle. Cornette argued that professional wrestling's economic engine relies entirely on the suspension of disbelief. The entire business model is built on a simple psychological contract with the audience. If the audience is explicitly told that the matches are scripted, if the curtain is pulled back and the mechanisms are exposed, the emotional stakes of the athletic conflict die immediately. The fans stop caring who wins because they have been told repeatedly that none of it matters. Russo operated under the opposite assumption. He actively sought to de-emphasize ring work, the actual athletic contest that formed the foundation of wrestling. He wanted to replace structured matches with rapid 2-minute encounters that ended in chaos, frequent run-ins, constant interference, worked shoots designed to cater to internet-savvy fans by exposing the inner workings of the business as though breaking the fourth wall was a creative innovation rather than a death sentence. This philosophical divide manifested in backstage heat that became legendary within the industry. It also resulted in a series of controversial controversial creative decisions that Cornette vehemently opposed, warning repeatedly that these decisions would permanently damage the industry's integrity and alienate the core audience that kept the business alive. The first major flashpoint involved vocabulary restrictions and commentary heat. Russo and executive Kevin Dunn, who controlled the production truck and held enormous power over how the product was presented on television, developed deep animosity toward Cornette over his traditional presentation style. They despised Cornette's color commentary because he frequently referenced historical wrestling territories. Organizations like the NWA and the regional promotions that had built the industry over decades. He insisted on using words like wrestling and wrestlers, industry terms that Russo and Dunn wanted banned. These terms ran counter to the corporate push toward the sanitized language of sports entertainment, a branding effort designed to distance the product from its working-class roots. Cornette refused to comply. He believed that erasing wrestling history disconnected the product from its roots and alienated longtime fans who understood the lineage of the business and respected the traditions that made wrestling special. The second flashpoint involved the deliberate sabotage of serious talent. When Cornette attempted to book legendary hard-hitting veteran Terry Funk back into the company, he suggested a traditional surprise return. Funk would return in a box, concealed from the audience, and emerge at the end of the show to a massive pop. Cornette operated on the well-established booking principle that anyone who comes out of a box is instantly over with the crowd. The surprise creates immediate heat. The unexpected appearance of a legend generates buzz and elevates whoever they interact with. Vince McMahon and Russo took this traditional surprise return and modified it beyond recognition. They turned it into Chainsaw Charlie, a comedic character who emerged from a box wearing a leather mask and carrying a chainsaw, playing the role for laughs. Cornette was left completely floored by the modification. He viewed it as a deliberate dilution of a serious legend's athletic credibility. Instead of presenting Funk as a tough, dangerous veteran who could elevate younger talent through his presence and his willingness to work a hard-hitting style, the company turned him into a comedy act that the audience could not take seriously. The character became a punchline. The legend became a joke. The third flashpoint was the Brawl for All tournament in 1998, one of the most catastrophic booking decisions in WWF history. Conceived by Russo, this was an unscripted, legitimate shoot boxing tournament within a scripted wrestling program. Russo designed it with the petty objective of seeing Bradshaw, who had backstage heat, defeated in combat. The result was disastrous. It exposed the scripted nature of the surrounding product. It severely injured several athletes. It destroyed the push of newly signed star Steve Dr. Death Williams, who was knocked out by Bart Gunn. Williams' WWF career never recovered. Cornette warned that mixing legitimate combat with scripted entertainment creates cognitive dissonance. If one match is real and the next is fake, nothing feels authentic. The fourth flashpoint involved the Blue Blazer character in 1999. A creative decision Cornette holds Russo directly responsible for. Russo booked Owen Hart, one of the most talented technical wrestlers in the world, to portray a bumbling comedic superhero character called the Blue Blazer. The character was designed as a parody. To enhance the presentation, Russo required Hart to execute a highly dangerous, dramatic entrance by rappelling from the arena rafters on a cable system. The stunt was intended to generate a moment, a visual spectacle. The stunt went tragically wrong at the Over the Edge pay-per-view in Kansas City. The quick release mechanism on Hart's harness malfunctioned. Hart fell over 20 meters from the rafters to the ring below. He died from his injuries. Cornette views this event as the ultimate consequence of Russo's obsession with cheap, non-wrestling spectacles. The pursuit of shock value led directly to a preventable tragedy. It was not wrestling. It was a dangerous circus stunt that had no place in a simulated athletic contest. Hart died for a comedy bit. The entire industry was devastated. The fifth flashpoint was the mockery of industry figures and the promotion of personal malice as creative content. Russo's reliance on inside jokes and his willingness to use real-life personal struggles as comedic material culminated in the creation of the Oklahoma character, portrayed by his writing partner, Ed Ferrara. The character was a cruel, direct parody of respected lead announcer Jim Ross, one of the most beloved voices in wrestling history. The parody specifically mocked Ross's real-life struggle with Bell's palsy, a medical condition that causes facial paralysis and speech difficulties. Russo and Ferrara thought it was funny to exaggerate Ross's condition for cheap heat. This creative choice deeply alienated key locker room leaders, particularly Cornette, who viewed it as a classless attack on a colleague that yielded absolutely absolutely no creative value. It was mean-spirited. It was unnecessary. It damaged morale backstage and made the company look petty, unprofessional, and cruel. By 1999, the ideological divide between Cornette and Russo had reached a breaking point. The creative committee was dysfunctional, the tension was unbearable. Russo left the WWF for WCW, accepting a lucrative contract and the promise of creative freedom. Cornette immediately warned the industry that Russo would now be unleashed without the filter that Vince McMahon had provided. In the WWF, McMahon acted as a highly restrictive editor who modified or discarded Russo's most absurd impulses. McMahon preserved the coherent narrative arcs of top-tier stars like Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Rock. He filtered out the worst ideas. He imposed structure. WCW gave Russo creative freedom. There was no filter. There was no editor. There was no structure. Cornette predicted disaster. He said publicly that WCW had just hired the man who would kill the company. Nobody listened. The WCW executives believed they had just stolen the creative genius behind the WWF's Attitude Era. They were wrong. In October 1999, WCW executives, panic-stricken by declining ratings and mounting corporate pressure from Time Warner, made the fateful decision to hire Vince Russo and Ed Ferrara to oversee all creative operations. The corporate hierarchy operated under the savior myth, falsely attributing the creative triumphs of the WWF's Attitude Era solely to Russo. They failed to recognize that Vince McMahon had acted as a highly restrictive, necessary filter. They failed to understand that the success of Austin and The Rock came from the performers themselves, from their charisma and their ability to connect with the audience, not from Russo's convoluted storylines. They failed to recognize that a creative committee had refined the angles, that veteran agents had structured the matches, that the locker room had elevated the material. Unleashed in WCW without a filter, without an editor, without any restraint whatsoever, Russo implemented his unadulterated Crash TV booking style. The result was unprecedented financial and creative ruin that destroyed one of the most valuable brands in sports entertainment history. The most egregious blows to the title's credibility occurred with the crownings of non-wrestlers, people who had no business holding a wrestling championship. On April 25th, 2000, during a taping of WCW Thunder, Hollywood actor David Arquette won the WCW World Heavyweight Championship in a tag team match. Arquette was in WCW to promote his movie Ready to Rumble, a comedy about wrestling fans. He was not a trained wrestler. He had no athletic background. He was a comedic actor playing a role. Arquette teamed with world champion Diamond Dallas Page against Eric Bischoff and Jeff Jarrett under a special stipulation that Russo created specifically to generate mainstream media attention. Whoever scored the winning pinfall would be crowned the WCW World Champion. The referee counted Bischoff's shoulders to the mat under a pin by Arquette, awarding the actor the prestigious belt that Ric Flair, Sting, and Hulk Hogan had spent years building into a symbol of excellence. The decision was meant to generate mainstream media attention for the movie. It did generate attention. Every major media outlet covered the story, but the coverage was mocking. The industry became a punchline. The decision also signaled to every serious wrestling fan that the company viewed its top championship, the belt that represented the pinnacle of the sport, as a cheap promotional tool. The belt was a prop. The championship was a joke. Arquette himself was reportedly uncomfortable with the decision. He understood that it damaged the business. He donated his entire WCW paycheck to the families of deceased wrestlers and to the family of Owen Hart. Arquette knew it was wrong. Russo did not care. Just months later, on September 25th, 2000, Russo decided to book himself to win the world title in a steel cage match on Monday Nitro. Russo, a middle-aged writer with no athletic training whatsoever, held the same championship that Ric Flair, Sting, and Hulk Hogan had fought to build into a symbol of excellence over decades. Russo was not a wrestler. He was not an athlete. He was a writer who fancied himself a character. He put himself over the entire roster. These booking decisions drew immense scorn from both hardcore fans and the locker room. The message was clear. If an actor or a middle-aged writer could win the industry's ultimate prize, the athletic credibility of the entire roster was a joke. This strategy alienated alienated the core paying audience, the dedicated fans who bought tickets and ordered pay-per-views. The result was a severe drop in pay-per-view buy rates and live gate revenues. The casual fans left. The hardcore fans felt insulted. The business collapsed. Cornette's logic on this issue was simple and irrefutable. The World Championship represents the pinnacle of the sport. It symbolizes that the holder is the best athlete in the company, the toughest competitor, the most skilled performer. When a non-athlete wins the belt, when someone with no training and no credibility holds the championship, the entire roster looks amateur. The audience asks a reasonable question. If an actor can beat a professional wrestler, how tough are these professional wrestlers? If a writer can win the world title, what does that say about the athletic ability of everyone else? The illusion shatters. The stakes die. The investment evaporates. Russo's localized, insular booking philosophy also devastated WCW's highly profitable and prestigious international relationships, alliances that had taken years to build and maintain. Without consulting New Japan Pro Wrestling, a key partner that exchanged talent and elevated WCW's global athletic credibility, Russo booked a surprise title change on television in late 1999. He had Juventud Guerrera defeat Jushin Thunder Liger for the IWGP Junior Heavyweight Championship, a belt that belonged to New Japan, by striking Liger with a tequila bottle. The decision to change another promotion's prestigious title without authorization, without any coordination or communication, and without any athletic logic severely damaged WCW's standing with New Japan. International partnerships in wrestling are built on mutual respect, careful coordination, and the understanding that titles represent the prestige of the organization that owns them. Russo treated the IWGP title as a prop for a cheap angle on Nitro. He booked a tequila bottle finish for a championship that represented years of tradition and athletic excellence in Japan. New Japan was furious. The relationship was damaged. The diplomatic friction took years for the industry to mend. WCW lost access to top Japanese talent. The partnership that had elevated both companies was destroyed by one reckless decision. The culmination of Russo's self-indulgent worked-shoot booking, the moment that best represents everything Cornette warned against, occurred at the Bash at the Beach 2000 pay-per-view. Russo attempted to navigate a real backstage political impasse with Hulk Hogan, who held a creative control clause in his contract that gave him approval over how he was presented on television. By executing a highly complex, confusing on-screen angle that blurred the line between reality and fiction. The pre-arranged plan, worked out in advance between Russo and Hogan, dictated that champion Jeff Jarrett would literally lie down in the ring in front of Hogan, allowing Hogan to pin him with a single foot in a humiliating display designed to make Jarrett look weak. Hogan would then walk out of the company with the physical belt, setting up a storyline where the company would crown a new champion while Hogan held the actual title belt hostage. However, once Hogan left the arena believing the storyline would set up his triumphant return down the line, Russo completely changed the plan. He returned to the ring and cut an unscripted, highly personal promo on live television that was never part of the agreed storyline. Russo publicly fired Hogan from WCW, used severe profanity on a pay-per-view broadcast, and insulted Hogan's real-life professional integrity in a vicious tirade. He called Hogan a politician. He said Hogan held the company back. He mocked Hogan's age and his career. Hogan, watching the broadcast from backstage, was deeply humiliated. He felt betrayed. The worked angle had become a shoot. Hogan filed a massive real-life lawsuit against Russo and WCW's parent company, alleging breach of contract and defamation of character. The lawsuit claimed that Russo had violated their agreement and damaged Hogan's reputation by publicly attacking him on television. The resulting legal battle dragged on for several years, tying up company resources and creating negative publicity. It ultimately ended in a ruling in favor of WCW and Russo due to specific legal loopholes that Russo's attorneys exploited. First, the court ruled that because Russo only referred to the on-screen character Hulk Hogan and never uttered the performer's actual legal name, Terry Bollea, during the promo, it did not meet the legal threshold for defamation of the actual person under the law. Second, the court found a loophole in Hogan's WCW contract regarding the interpretation of his creative control clause. The court interpreted the clause to apply strictly to specific match finishes finishes, the outcomes of his in-ring contests, rather than subsequent promotional segments and live television promos that occurred after the match had ended. While Russo technically won the legal battle on these technicalities, the segment completely shattered the illusion of the show. The audience was thoroughly confused. They did not know what was real and what was scripted. They did not know if Hogan was legitimately fired or if this was part of an elaborate storyline. They did not know if they should be outraged or entertained. The confusion accelerated WCW's descent toward bankruptcy. Cornette had warned for years that work shoots destroy the product because they eliminate the audience's ability to suspend disbelief. The Bash at the Beach 2000 debacle proved him absolutely right. You cannot tell the audience that the show is fake and then expect them to care about the storylines. Once you break the fourth wall, once you expose the mechanisms and blur the line between reality and fiction, the magic dies. The investment evaporates. The audience leaves. By the time Time Warner sold the promotion to the WWF in early 2001, WCW was hemorrhaging over £60 million annually. The company was losing staggering amounts of money. The ratings had collapsed. The pay-per-view buy rates were abysmal. The live attendance was embarrassing. The corporate parent wanted nothing to do with wrestling anymore. This financial collapse directly proved Cornette's thesis. A product built entirely on cheap tricks, constant swerves, and exposing its own fiction cannot sustain a business once the novelty wears off. The short-term rating spikes that Russo generated in the WWF during the Attitude Era came at the cost of long-term credibility. WCW paid the ultimate price. The company died. Thousands of people lost their jobs. One of the most valuable brands in entertainment history was sold for pennies on the pound. Following the death of WCW, professional wrestling desperately required a mainstream alternative to the newly established WWE monopoly. The industry needed competition. The wrestlers needed options. The fans wanted a choice. In 2002, Jeff Jarrett and his father Jerry launched NWA-TNA as a wrestling-first promotion featuring elite athletic young talent. The company promised to focus on in-ring excellence, on showcasing the best wrestlers in the world, on logical storytelling, and on respect for the traditions that made wrestling special. Yet, demonstrating a profound failure to learn from recent history, demonstrating that the lessons of WCW's catastrophic collapse had not been absorbed, Jarrett brought Vince Russo into the creative mix in late 2002. This decision drew immediate condemnation from traditionalists across the industry, particularly Jim Cornette, who could not believe what he was seeing. Cornette publicly warned TNA management that they were inviting the creative executioner of WCW into their new venture. He said they were repeating the same mistake. He said they were setting themselves up for disaster. Nobody listened. The executives believed they could control Russo. They believed they could filter his ideas. They were wrong. Russo immediately attempted to recreate his late-era WCW concepts, recycling the same failed ideas that had destroyed the previous company. He introduced a dominant heel faction called Sports Entertainment Extreme in December 2002. The faction's explicit narrative goal was to destroy the traditional heritage of the NWA, to tear down the legacy of 60 years of wrestling history, and to replace it with Russo's hypersexualized, fast-paced sports entertainment philosophy. The Sports Entertainment Extreme faction followed a predictable trajectory that mirrored every other Russo booking concept. It launched on December 4th, 2002, with Russo confronting Roddy Piper, a legendary wrestler from a previous generation, while the Harris twins and B.G. James brutally attacked Ron Killings, establishing the group's physical dominance through violence. On December 18th, 2002, Christopher Daniels, Low-Ki, and Elix Skipper, three of the most talented young wrestlers in the world, joined the faction. They cited real backstage contract and travel disputes in their promos, blending real-life locker room issues with the fictional storyline in classic Russo fashion. The worked shoot continued. In late January 2003, Russo used his temporary booking power to crown Elix Skipper and Low-Ki as the NWA World Tag Team Champions, while Sonny Siaki retained the X Division title, hotshotting titles to create the illusion of importance. On January 29th, 2003, Glenn Gilberti, formerly known as Disco Inferno, was named Director of Talent Development, a fictional corporate position. Tony Schiavone made a shocking appearance to join the group, turning his back on traditional wrestling and mocking the company's traditionalists in a promo. Backstage tension escalated dramatically throughout Russo's tenure. When Cornette joined TNA in 2006 as an on-screen authority figure and backstage management consultant, he found himself in a toxic backstage environment that reminded him of the worst days of WCW. Cornette argued passionately that TNA possessed some of the greatest young athletes in the world. AJ Styles was a generational talent. Samoa Joe was a legitimate tough guy who could work any style. The stars of the X Division were capable of incredible athletic performances that could draw money and build the company. However, Russo's booking actively choked their potential. He placed them in short, overbooked 3-minute gimmick matches that ended in chaos. He put them in illogical comedy skits that made them look foolish. He prevented them from being taken seriously as drawing stars. Cornette fought with Russo constantly. The creative meetings were wars. The backstage environment was poisonous. The friction grew so intense that Cornette ultimately quit the promotion in disgust, refusing to participate in a creative system that actively sabotaged its own talent. He walked away rather than be complicit in the destruction. The most damaging corporate fallout of TNA's association with Russo, the incident that destroyed the company's mainstream future, occurred in 2014. By this period, TNA's television broadcast partner, Spike TV, had grown thoroughly dissatisfied with the company's creative direction. The ratings were declining. The brand was not growing. The network was losing money on the deal. Network executives issued an explicit directive to TNA President Dixie Carter. The message was clear and non-negotiable. The network would not renew TNA's lucrative television contract if Vince Russo was involved with the company's creative operations in any capacity whatsoever. Spike knew Russo's history. They knew WCW had collapsed under his booking. They wanted nothing to do with him. The directive was final. Desperate to retain Russo's services while keeping the network pacified, desperate to keep Russo's ideas flowing while hiding his involvement from Spike, TNA management engaged in a high-stakes corporate deception. They secretly kept Russo on the payroll as a hidden creative and production consultant. They routed his booking feedback through private email channels. They created a back-channel system where Russo could submit ideas and scripts without his name appearing on any official paperwork. The deception was deliberate. It was calculated. It was corporate fraud. The secret was exposed through an extraordinary administrative error by Russo himself, a mistake so careless that it destroyed the entire scheme. In July 2014, Russo accidentally sent an internal TNA email to the wrong person. The email contained specific broadcast and creative instructions. It was intended for play-by-play announcer Mike Tenay. Instead of typing Tenay's email address, Russo typed the address of Mike Johnson, a prominent journalist at PW Insider, one of the most well-known wrestling news websites. Johnson received the email. He read the internal instructions. He immediately understood what it meant. Russo was still working for TNA despite the network ban. Russo's initial defensive denial was loud and aggressive. When Johnson reported the existence of the email confirming Russo's active employment, Russo lashed out on social media, claiming the report was fake. He mocked the internet wrestling community. He tried to play it off as a joke. He posted on his account that it was amazing to see that anybody will print anything as truth without checking into it. He said it was nice to see the swerve still works, treating the exposure of corporate fraud as though it were a clever wrestling angle. However, once Johnson threatened to publicly publish the raw, unedited email headers, which would prove beyond any doubt that the email came from Russo's account and was sent to TNA's internal systems, Russo was forced to capitulate. There was no escape. The evidence was irrefutable. He released a public statement on his personal website admitting to the secret employment. The statement read that recently he accidentally sent an email to a third party that was not meant for their eyes. The email concerned his current involvement in TNA wrestling. TNA rendered his services as a consultant to work with their announcing team. The admission confirmed everything. Russo had been working for TNA in secret. The company had lied directly to Spike TV. The deception was exposed. This public exposure had immediate, catastrophic consequences. Spike TV executives were furious at having been directly lied to by Dixie Carter and TNA management. The trust between the two entities was permanently broken. Corporate partnerships are built on trust. When that trust is violated, when a partner discovers they have been deliberately deceived, the relationship is over. The network declined to renew TNA's television contract. The decision was final. There would be no negotiation. Deprived of its primary source of revenue and mainstream North American television distribution, TNA was forced onto a series of minor low-reach networks. Destination America, Pop TV, networks that nobody watched. The company lost its roster of elite talent. AJ Styles left for New Japan and eventually WWE. Samoa Joe left for WWE. The X Division stars scattered. The company effectively ended its run as a viable competitor in the mainstream wrestling market. The Spike scandal was the final nail in the coffin. TNA never recovered. The company limped along for years, eventually rebranding as Impact Wrestling, but the damage was permanent. The mainstream opportunity was gone forever. All because Dixie Carter and Jeff Jarrett refused to cut ties with Vince Russo. Analyzing the economic and cultural trajectory of professional wrestling from the late 1990s through the mid-2010s reveals that the damage inflicted by Russo's booking philosophy was not merely creative, not just a matter of bad television, but deeply structural. By prioritizing immediate short-term shock value over logical progression, by treating the audience as stupid marks who needed to be constantly surprised, Crash TV permanently altered the viewing habits of the audience and systematically destroyed the industry's economic foundation. The effects lasted for over a decade. The primary defense of Russo's booking, the argument that his supporters still make to this day, has always been the temporary rating spikes experienced during the Monday Night Wars. Russo points to the success of the WWF's Attitude Era as proof that his methods work. However, a deeper economic analysis reveals that this strategy generated a high-stimulus bubble that was destined to burst. Russo's style targeted casual channel surfers with highly sexualized content, non-sequitur swerves that made no sense, and frantic pacing that prioritized moments over storytelling. The fatal flaw of this approach is that shock value has a rapid rate of diminishing returns. To maintain the same level of viewer stimulation, each successive episode must be increasingly outrageous, eventually culminating in creative exhaustion and absurdity. You can only turn the volume up so loud before the audience goes deaf. When Russo took over WCW in October 1999, Monday Nitro was still being viewed by millions of fans. The show had declined from its peak, but it still had a massive audience. Within 2 years, those viewers did not simply migrate back to the WWF. They turned off professional wrestling entirely. They stopped watching. They stopped caring. By treating the core product as a trashy, self-deprecating joke, by telling the audience repeatedly that wrestling was fake and stupid, Russo trained the casual audience to view the entire industry as an embarrassing, disorganized fad that was not worth their long-term attention. The evaporation of the casual audience represents the single greatest economic loss in wrestling history. These were not hardcore fans who would follow the product through thick and thin. These were casual viewers who tuned in for entertainment, who might buy a pay-per-view if the storyline was compelling, who might buy a t-shirt if they connected with a character. Once they were trained to view wrestling as a joke, they left and never came back. The industry lost an entire generation of potential fans. The emotional mechanism that drives profitable professional wrestling, the psychological contract that makes the business work, is the audience's deep investment in a narrative payoff. For a fan to purchase a ticket to a live event, to buy a pay-per-view and invite friends over to watch, to acquire merchandise and wear it in public, they must psychologically believe that the conflict between the hero and the villain is real within the context of the show. They must care who wins. They must be emotionally invested in the outcome. Russo's shades of grey booking, his obsession with moral ambiguity and constant character turns, stripped this mechanism of its power. By booking constant illogical character turns, sometimes having the same wrestler turn from hero to villain and back again multiple times within a single month, he created a state of narrative instability where nothing meant anything. If a character's motivations change completely without logical justification, if there is no consistency or reason behind their actions, the audience stops cheering or booing. They become detached. They adopt a passive, highly critical viewing stance. They stop investing emotionally. They stop buying tickets. They stop caring who wins because they know the alignment will change next week anyway. Furthermore, Russo's obsession with breaking the fourth wall and executing worked shoots created profound cognitive dissonance in the minds of viewers. You cannot present a dramatic television show where the actors regularly turn to the camera, admit the script is fake, mock the audience for believing it, and then expect the audience to care who wins the match 10 minutes later. It is psychologically impossible. Once the illusion of athletic stakes is completely destroyed, once the audience has been told repeatedly that none of it matters, the viewer's psychological permission to suspend disbelief is permanently rescinded. Cornette understood this fundamental truth about human psychology and the business of illusion. He understood that wrestling is not about fooling people into thinking it is completely real in a literal sense. It is about creating a framework, a set of rules and internal logic, where the audience gives you permission to emotionally invest. That permission is fragile. It requires consistency. It requires logic. It requires treating the product with respect and taking the story seriously. Russo violated every one of these principles with enthusiasm. He broke the fourth wall constantly. He booked illogical swerves that contradicted everything that had come before. He treated the product as a joke and encouraged the audience to view it the same way. The audience withdrew their permission to invest. The business collapsed. The comparison between Cornette's philosophy and Russo's philosophy reveals the systemic divide that destroyed the industry. Cornette believed you must protect the illusion to maintain stakes. Russo believed you should expose the script to get quick, shocking reactions. Cornette believed wins and losses must dictate the stories. Russo believed title changes and swerves should happen constantly to pop a rating. Cornette believed the ring is an athletic stage for main event stars. Russo believed the ring is a prop for comedy skits and backstage segments. The systemic result of following Russo's philosophy was the destruction of the audience's ability to emotionally invest, the complete devaluation of championships, and a massive decline in television ratings and buy rates that nearly killed the industry. Decades after Cornette and Russo clashed in the creative boardrooms of the WWF, after years of financial disasters and failed companies, the definitive historical verdict has been rendered. The industry's current landscape in May 2026 stands as a complete vindication of the foundational booking principles that Cornette defended at the cost of his mainstream career. Today, Vince Russo is entirely marginalized, a pariah whose booking philosophy is universally recognized by modern promoters and corporate executives as a blueprint for creative and financial bankruptcy. He is radioactive. No major company will hire him. His name is synonymous with failure. In stark contrast, the historic record-breaking financial success of modern professional wrestling, spearheaded by WWE's corporate integration under TKO Group Holdings, is driven entirely by a return to serious, logically coherent, and long-term narrative structures. Under the creative stewardship of Paul Triple H Levesque, modern wrestling has abandoned the frantic, self-deprecating tropes of crash TV completely. The industry's current economic boom is built on slow-burn, emotionally grounded epics that treat the audience with intelligence and respect. The most notable example is Cody Rhodes' multi-year Finish the Story arc, a narrative that took years to build and paid off at WrestleMania to massive emotional response. The complex, multi-layered family drama of the Bloodline saga, involving Roman Reigns and his family, has generated record-breaking gates and merchandise sales. In these narratives, titles are once again treated as highly prestigious, sacred prizes that represent years of hard work and dedication. Wins and losses dictate logical progression. If you lose repeatedly, you move down the card. If you win, you move up. The athletic credibility of the performers is protected at all costs. Wrestlers are presented as elite athletes, not as comedy characters or props for writers. Modern fans are treated not as short attention span consumers of trash television, but as dedicated theatergoers willing to invest years in a single narrative payoff. The return to traditionalism, the embrace of Cornette's philosophy, has generated unprecedented financial results. Record-breaking live gates that fill stadiums worldwide. Massive media rights deals worth billions. The industry is healthier, more profitable, and more respected than it has ever been in its history. Jim Cornette's decades of explosive, passionate warnings, his angry rants on podcasts and in interviews, were not the bitter complaints of an outdated promoter who could not keep up with changing times. They were an accurate, logical diagnosis of a highly destructive creative disease that was killing the industry. Cornette understood a fundamental truth about human psychology and the business of illusion. You can easily fool an audience with a magic trick once. You can create a moment of surprise. You can generate a pop. But if you show them how the trapdoor works, if you expose the secret mechanism just to get a cheap laugh, they will never buy a ticket to see your show again. The trapdoor is the secret. The trapdoor is the mechanism that creates the illusion. The moment you expose it, the moment you point at it and laugh at the audience for believing, the magic dies forever. Russo spent his entire career opening the trapdoor, pointing at the mechanism and laughing at the audience, forever believing in the trick. He thought this made him clever. He thought this made him edgy and ahead of his time. He thought this made him a visionary who understood television better than anyone else. Instead, it made him the architect of the greatest economic collapse in wrestling history. His booking philosophy destroyed WCW, damaged TNA beyond repair, and cost the industry billions in lost revenue and millions of fans who never came back. In May 2026, as professional wrestling enjoys its greatest financial era in history by treating its product with respect, by protecting the illusion, by building long-term stories with logical payoffs, the industry has finally learned the lesson that Cornette screamed at the top of his lungs for decades. Protect the illusion, respect the championships, build long-term stories, treat wins and losses as meaningful, as give the audience permission to invest emotionally. The modern boom is not a coincidence. It is not random luck. It is a direct result of abandoning Russo's philosophy completely and returning to the principles that Cornette defended when it was unpopular to do so. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the ideological war that nearly destroyed wrestling, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment with your thoughts on the Cornette versus Russo debate. And if you want to support more content like this, give the video some hype and let us know what topic you want us to cover next.